Mr. Hamilton. We'll start with answering a few questions. Okay, so why did you join the service in the first place?
Well, first I'll say I'm Richard Hamilton,
Okay.
born in 1922, and I joined the service. I believe it was something that stirred within me, but I didn't rush out and volunteer. I waited a year and until the draft caught up with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went with many other young people when they left Brattleboro from Windham County. I left on New Year's Day, 1942.
How many, were any of those your friends, or?
Yes, they sure were. And here is the group of men that I left with, and one of them happened to be Richard L. Hamilton from Brattleboro, who was in the oil business, and so for a few days while we were together, we were Richard Hamilton, and when they'd call Hamilton, we'd say, which one? And they'd look down the list again, and, oh, Richard, well, which one? It was an H and an L that differentiated us. There were many young men that I knew, but it was a whole county-wide group that left together.
Now, how old were you?
Let's see, that was in 1942, so I just had my 20th birthday.
What were you doing before you joined, or got drafted?
I worked for the Eastern States Farmers Exchange. It was a farmers' feed cooperative. They sold all sort of feed supplies and farm supplies to farmers, but mainly it was handling 100-pound burlap sacks of grain for poultry, for cattle, horses, and so that was what I was doing, and I was pretty rugged. And at home, however, I was raising chickens. At one time I had 500 chickens, from little ones to broilers to roasting chickens and laying chickens. And so when I'd get home from my work, I would have plenty to do till the darkness fell in the summertime, when I would move chickens from range to range and clean out boxes and houses that had to do with raising that poultry.
And how did your parents feel about you joining?
Well, I had, I lived in a home that we had 9 people there, generally all the time. My dad had died when I was 6 years old, and so it was my mother and grandfather who my gramp was, he gave us all our the knowledge that we needed to whet a scythe and to fix about anything that was broken on the farm. And however, he was crippled with rheumatism, and he was out into the field. But when we'd be swinging a scythe, I remember him saying, "Boy, come over here, I don't think that's very sharp." And he showed us how to whet that scythe, and things like that. Okay, so I don't know how deep down my mother felt, but she was just another patriotic person that we were all so devastated to hear President Roosevelt on the. We just gathered close. We didn't have electricity in our home, so it meant when we went to bed, we carried a kerosene lamp, and things were quite primitive. So with my mother, I'm sure she was anxious, and my gramp, I don't think he'd want to see his. I know in the years since, I've thought how devastating that must have been for them, because I wouldn't want to see my kids going off.
But yet,
and,
you're patriotic, so.
But it was something that we had to do. Everyone was going to, every family, I'm sure, felt the same way, that we had to do something. And so I know when I left home, I had to walk down the hill as we went to school. We walked a half a mile to meet a school bus. And so there wasn't transportation readily. There was one family car, and there were 5 of us kids, and mother and my aunt, and we all used that same car. And any errands in the big city of Brattleboro, 7 miles away, had to be all grouped together, and or else you didn't go. And so I walked. I left my gramp. He was the only one in the house, and he said, "Goodbye, son, and may God be with you always." And I thought, wow. But so I walked out the door and left. But there's been just many, many times when I've thought back to how devastated he must have been to see a grand. But that was the last time I saw my gramp, because when I was in gunnery school at the end of 1943, I got word that he'd passed away. But Mother urged me not to come because it was all by train, and it would be, she says, "There's nothing you can do here," she said, and she felt there was more danger traveling to get home than there would be to stay put. And so my family accepted the eventuality that I was going into the service.
Yeah. Where did you end up doing your basic training at?
I went to Fort Devens with this group of men from Windham County, and then several days of testing and aptitude testing and issuing of clothing at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I then got on a troop train and headed to Miami Beach. And that was pretty neat to travel down the East Coast on a train, and then I remember how music really affected our thinking. And at the time, Chattanooga Choo Choo was very popular, and as we went down through the Carolinas, and I went through the Chow line, here was that song in the background, dinner in the diner, nothing could be finer than to have your ham and eggs in Carolina. And so, I mean, that was, so you go on with that tune all the rest of the way if you want to Florida. But it was Miami Beach that I took my 4 weeks of basic training, walking around through the streets, and we were put up in some of those luxury beachside hotels. on, and so much the envy of different other people in the service, because I realized then I was in the Army Air Corps, and the Army took over those beachside resorts to house and train their servicemen.
Mm-hmm.
That's Miami Beach, the first phase, and the next would be going to Chicago, where I began to learn Morse code. I was a radio operator,
Mm-hmm.
Based on whatever the testing that they took place at Fort Devens, and so this was getting into Morse code and radio mechanics, and still marching around the city of Chicago and on Wrigley Field, and at that time, I remember and know it well now as the Windy City, and it was in cold February and March, and as I remember back on the farm, if we had worked a team of horses, if you're going to let them stand very long, you'd throw a blanket over them, and but there we were out there standing for long periods in the cold. But that was part of our training,
Yep.
but I remember it did catch up with me and I got I don't know, bronchitis or something, and was hospitalized for a short time. And
Short time.
Yeah.
And what was your culture shock with people and moving from a small town to, say, Miami or Chicago? Is there
That's pretty interesting, because I hadn't left home. I hadn't been away from home except a week at 4-H camp. But I was 11 years old then, and the average age was for 12. But since siblings were going along too, they broke the rule and let an 11-year-old go. But that's the only time I'd been away from home, and so. But I didn't have any. There was always something doing. I didn't have any.
like quiet time?
Homesickness or
Yeah.
I didn't seem to. That didn't seem to bother me, and what I realized is that I was in good physical condition, having being able to toss around those 100-pound bags of grain, and so being in the Army was nothing to it. It was just walking and marching, and so I had no problem
Mm-hmm.
blending into that atmosphere.
Mm. Now, did you have any like interesting stories while you were in basic training? You know, some people play pranks. Some people just, just have a good time when they're there, when they're not training, or.
Yeah, we always had. There was always a good time. There was seldom, if any, disagreements that would lead to a squabble or a fight or anything. It was just kids playing, and it was seemed to be an enjoyable time, and little did we think as we were going through our training of how the combat would be.
Mm-hmm.
We just had no idea.
Yep. Now you were talking about being doing Morse code. So what exactly was your occupation in the Army?
All right, I was being trained as a radio operator, and on a B-17,
Mm-hmm.
and so we needed to know the basics of the mechanics of that the set that we would be using. We needed to know naturally and be proficient in receiving Morse code, because all the messages came over in Morse code, dots and dashes, and then we'd encode it into a readable language, and then take it to the pilot, who it would generally had to do with our on course or off course, or the radio operator was a last resort if the navigator on the plane had a problem with his direction or something. The radio operator received messages and monitored all the time for any callback or so forth.
Now, when you were in your combat zone, were you in the Pacific or were you over Germany?
I was over Germany.
And how was that for?
I was stationed in England.
Oh, okay.
And we flew our missions from England. Bassingbourn was the town or the base that I was in, and that's near Cambridge. Anyway, that's our base, and we flew over Germany.
Now, what was your experience like when you first got in? Was it for flying? Was it anything that you imagined it would be, or was it more of a wow? I can't believe what's going on?
All right. When I first was taken to this plane, this B-17, as a small farm boy, I remember writing home, the wingspan of this plane was 103 feet, and that was big.
Yeah.
And it was, as I say, it was noteworthy and to write home about, and it had those 4 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engines, and the radio compartment was right just behind the wing here, and at first there was a 50 caliber machine gun in the radio operator's skylight, and it was a restricted, because the tail was straight back here, there was an automatic shut-off, so that if I was tracking enemy aircraft, this tail section was protected by an automatic shut-off, and which is kind of unique, and but I forgot the question now.
Your combat experience, like when you first got in.
About flying.
Yep.
We did a lot of flying as we assembled in some of the other bases that I went to. Was Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That was radio operator. But all the time we were being trained on foot as soldiers too. And but some of it was studying, and some of it was out there in the field, and exercising and physical training always. And from there I went to Yuma, Arizona for gunnery school, and then from Yuma, Arizona we went to Alexandria, Louisiana, where we were formed as a crew, and we did our flying night and day around Lake Charles, and Oh, we'd go like in a box, 200 miles east, 200 miles north, and west, and so on. And then we do this at night. And I have a letter that was saved that that I had written home to my father-in-law that described every detail that I had to take care of when I went back to the plane. And I'll swear that to this day I marvel at that letter, because I guess I don't remember all the details, but we had to check out the head phones and then get them plugged in and then check them all out before
Mm-hmm.
the flight. And there were just a lot of little things that the radio man had to do. But so and then we went to Kearney, Nebraska, where we were assigned or given this great shiny B-17, and it was going to be our job to fly it over to England. So we left Kearney, Nebraska, flew to Bangor, Maine, then to Gander, Newfoundland, where we touched down overnight, and then on to Prestwick, Scotland. But some of the, we encountered some cold weather and a little problem with icing, and realized that that cold North Atlantic was underneath us, and it was a little bit of anxiety there before we finally arrived at Prestwick, Scotland, and landed, and that old terra firma was, we appreciated that. But and another thing that I have to marvel at is as we fly today and take nothing, all this stuff for granted, there was no insulation. This was just the metal skin, and imagine those powerful engines. It was a noisy time, but of course we had our earphones on, and but it was a time of anxiety. I realized it because I knew that if we got off course, or then we'd want to, they'd begin to rely on the radio man to, where are we, and give us a bearing, and so on and so forth. And so, but when we got to flying our missions, yes, there were times, I know one time, when we were just in the air and forming, and we got caught in we were up pretty high, as I remember, because we'd had our oxygen masks on, so we were up like 15,000 feet, and we got caught in prop wash from another plane, and that struck the wings, and it just forced us
Right down.
right down. And when we had, when the pilot had successfully pulled that plane out, it had stressed the plane so that there was a crack in the, we had to get back to base. We weren't prepared to go into combat that time, because all the ammunition was just lifted out of the boxes and just hanging down. They were already threaded into the into the 50 caliber machine guns. But the plane was so stressed, and I tell you, I think we were stressed too. As I remember, coming up and breathing as hard as if I'd run a race. And we were so, well, the vibration of that plane was just unbelievable. But before that, we were headed for the ground, and he was able to pull it out. I don't know whether what kind of, I don't know his problems, but that was a scary time. And, but that was nothing to do with enemy. That was just flying. And did I answer that one?
Yep. Nope. That worked. Now, how long did it take you from Bangor, Maine to Scotland for a flight?
Oh, gee, can I put that together?
Rough guess. I mean, it would.
I don't
you
know.
said it was overnight to the.
Seems like it was 6 or 8 hours. And well, anyway, that's what it seems like. And and I'm not going to say it couldn't be or whatever. It just seemed like it was a long time, and I'm going to say 6 or 8 hours.
Yeah. Now, when you were in combat, like, what were the first dangerous things that you came across?
Okay. For one thing, we've heard so much about how they measure stress and anxiety in this day and age, but I don't think I heard the word stress ever back in World War II. However, what I'm going to say is that when you got onto that plane, we had all heard that sometimes when the loaded plane with the weight of the bombs, and that planes have been known to go down the runway and not be able to lift off in time. And so I was always relieved when we began to get a little altitude, and because you did hear of those things. And but the first thing that we encountered in enemy territory was the flak. The flak, when it explodes so close to you, it's a burst of black out front of you, and of course that's already dissipated the shrapnel that always goes with it. It's the ones that sometimes they'd explode right under your plane, and you'd feel it lift your plane, and that's when you could that's when it would pierce the skin of the plane, the fragments, and we always felt, do we wear our flak suits around us or do we sit on them? And we didn't like the idea of that shrapnel. And I was on 4 Munich raids, and they were long. They were, and fortunately, I have a record of the missions. I got in I was on my 9th mission, and I had saved back at the base on a letter, just an envelope, the cities that I had gone to bomb, the type of bomb that we carried, and the length of time we were in the air. And those Munich raids were 10 hours, and I think of it afterwards. But we were dead tired when we got back home, and it was just running on nerve or something. But the dangers that we faced, and even those times, cloudy days, it was just up front was just a black barrage, and that was the target area. We had to go through that, and that was not pleasant to anticipate. But we didn't have any bad problems until the 8th mission, when we were headed for Leipzig, and we were attacked by what history says is 60 ME-109s and FW-190s, and they came in low. We expected, when they were viewed by the tail gunner, that it was the expected escort of P-51s that were supposedly coming up to protect us, fly with us, but they were the German fighter planes. And next we knew, they were in on our tail, and we were being peppered with the 20 millimeter cannons and the 50 caliber machine gun bullets, and in that first wave, our plane was, I guess, destroyed. It was so many bullet holes. It was, and the whole thing was filled with smoke, and the bunch of cords that apparently was our communication system was just, those wires were just hanging down and frayed, and so there was no communication. We couldn't talk anymore, and so but our right wing had been shot off by the engine there, and the bomb bay was on fire. After extinguishing with the small extinguisher, nothing. I couldn't
get it out.
Couldn't get it out, and I was attempting to get up to the pilot and just let him know the condition back there, but there was no way to get up through. And at that time, as I moved about, I could see that my radio table, which was small, was splintered. It had apparently taken a 20 millimeter shell, and had I been there, sitting there, I would have been one of the casualties. They were, that first pass killed our navigator, our pilot, the engineer, who was taking the place of our regular engineer who had been on guard duty that night, and the tail gunner. Those 4 men were killed on that first pass, and so you can see why were those others not taken as well. But anyway, my waist gunner, we could gesture back and forth, and when he went back to the tail to check on the tail gunner, he came back with his head swinging like this, and so that meant the ball turret fellow, and his ball turret was rolling up, and he was going to come up to where he could open his hatch and come out. And as soon as we were aware that he was going to go, out the waist gunner went, and I too followed suit. And
Up on the parachute when you were jumping
all
and then
right,
landing.
yes, it was a very big jolt that was hardly able to describe it these days, but it did injure my back, and and so I was able to land in a hot wheat field, and it was all quiet, and I tried to wrap my parachute around and get it into a small cluster, and but there wasn't much place to hide it, and but very soon the whole village turned out, and the lead man that led the group, that people that had clubs and pitchforks, and he had a pistol in each hand, and as he came up the path toward me, he was firing, and I kept thinking that I was going to be hit one of these times, but apparently he wasn't. He was just trying to keep me in order and not be a danger to them.
Yeah.
And what I do remember very vividly is that the way they were so angered at me, and that if I had had my issued 45 on me that day, wherever, I think they would have taken it out and used it on me. But I was not a threat to them after they milled around and pushed me and jabbed me, and we went back into town, and it gave a chance for this macho, big handlebar mustache fellow to look at me with contempt, and he said, "Schweinhund," and he spit in my face, and of course, what can you do with spit running down your face with hands up? But that's what the commotion that made me realize that, okay, put your hands up, and that's what they wanted. And but they had got me into this little town hall room, and started interrogating me, and of course I had on the May West outside of the, let's see, the harness was over the May West, yeah, that's it. And so I'd used the parachute, the harness could come off, and that left the May West, we called them, flotation device that for crossing the channel. Mm-hmm. And so they would be inflated by pulling a little lever, and the little CO2 container would be punctured, and it would shoo, and it would blow that thing up. Well, when I pulled it, I think they suspected, I don't know what they suspected, but the thing, I hadn't pulled one of these, I had pulled them to know what they would do and how they would look, but this one was sort of restricted so that when that CO2 was punctured and it discharged, it squealed like a balloon when, and that's what I picture. So it made a big squealing now, and they jumped back and oh yeah, and they were got into a better mood, but they were keeping me at arm's length all the time there until. But we had maps that were fiber maps of the lay of the land, and we had money, German marks, and escape kit, mm-hmm. and had a little saw in it, and ooh, and they. I mean, it was terrible to feel that, hey, here's what we send our men out with, and so they must have, maybe this little local community hadn't seen any of that, but I'm sure the officials, when that all went back to headquarters, I'm sure they would have seen it before from all the other airmen that had come down in Germany. But I was then, that day, I was put into a jail, which was down the stairs, and there were some cellar lights that looked out onto like a sidewalk. So I was down in the basement part of that building, and there was a closed room, and with a bale of hay, a great big bale of hay, but that was the bed. And I didn't think it looked very clean, but anyway, they left me handcuffed behind me, and I was supposed to sleep or rest or like that. And so in the morning, I heard the keys jingle as they opened up 3 different doors when they came to me. And the guy had some hot boiled potatoes, and they looked good. And but my hands, when he unclipped the handcuffs, and my hands were just pin cushions. They were just puffed way up, and I had no feeling in them, and obviously they weren't going to have them slipping off my hands during the night, and but it was a time before I could manage the fork, and but then or the spoon. I'm not sure whether it's fork or a spoon, but the shaved potatoes tasted good, and he waited patiently till I'd eaten what I wanted to eat, and then he left, and I think it was another overnight that I spent there, and then the next day we were collected. I was connected. I was the only one, because as that plane was in its crippled form, it spread us out over the land.
Mm-hmm.
And I did see my waist gunner the next day in a group across a distance, and but we didn't acknowledge each other. We both were aware that the other was there, but we didn't want to say hi, hey. Mm-hmm. And so we were, the airmen apparently, as they came down, were collected and then went to an interrogation camp, which we'd been briefed on that. Dulag Luft is where they took us, and we were interrogated with a German officer who could speak just perfect English, and he talked about Coney Island, and like he wanted to be one of the Joes, and it just seemed strange that he'd know so much. This interrogation officer would know so much about our country, and so forth. But I didn't know anything about Coney Island. I was a farm boy from Vermont, and hadn't got there yet. And so that was that. And finally, after 8 days of bread and water, and a threat that I'd be there until they got the information they wanted. They wanted your, besides, we could give our name, rank, and serial number, but they wanted to know what your bomb group was, what the insignia was, and they had just all the information by turning the pages of these manuals or books that they had. Every training station across the country, we want to know where training was had, and all that stuff. And so the threat was that, well, you'll be here a long time, and you'll just be on bread and water until you give us this information. And there 8 days, and I just expected that I'd be there a while. And next to know, there we were. I was turned loose into an area where many were assembled, and I think they were going to be. We were just going to be heading toward Stalag Luft 4, which was the prison camp that I was going to be in. And Stalag Luft 4 is up here near the Baltic, and I put a star right here, and that's Stalag Luft 4. And it was about 3 days, going a little and stopping, and then they opened the doors, and you could go out briefly and then back in, and it was a long time. And then, of course, we had the threat of our own planes would bomb rail yards, and whether there were any markings of POW markings, we didn't know, but we just sweated out every time it would stop, and we'd be in a rail yard, and sometimes we'd sit for hours, and but as I say, it seemed to be just forever trip.
Did they keep moving you around, or did they from your camp, or no?
Well, going, I don't know what rail junction or how, what took so long. Stalag Luft was in this area here. Yeah, Stalag Luft was here, and we had to go to there, and so it was. It just seemed to take long because they couldn't shoot you right through on a straight path. We were always secondary freight train. We'd be pulled off, and a whole bunch of freight and army equipment would we'd observe go by, and then when they, I guess the track was clear, we'd resume again. But it was we saw laborers there repairing tracks that had been bombed, but anyway, we arrived at Stalag Luft 4, and we came early in the morning, and we just sat there and waited till about 7:30 or 8, and then a big army truck came up, a German army truck, and out came a whole contingent, and I'd say 12 to 16, and maybe more. Elite guards. They had German Shepherd dogs, and they put on a drill outside as we waited and watched, and the captain of the guard was naming off cities that had been bombed, and he got his guards and worked them up into a frenzy, and so then he gave the command of fixed bayonets, and as they did, it was just sort of a loud clatter of steel as they clamped them onto the front of the muzzle of the gun, and then a lot of posturing and drill work, and as I say, they were precision and a very elite looking outfit, and then they walked us out into the compound and or this area that was in front and lined us up on the road uh, in the direction of Stalag Luft 4. And then they did the counting, and there was just a lot of confusion and jostling around, and then we were headed towards Stalag Luft 4, and they roused, they wanted us to move faster, and next it was double time, and the fellows on the outside of the column were being jabbed every once in a while with a bayonet, and the dogs were just charging and being held back. And it was just a very threatening atmosphere, and it was undoubtedly to develop fear in us, which I don't know. I think we haven't ever talked about that, but I can think about it now and think that that's what that was all about. And so 4 kilometers was the distance up at Stalag Luft 4, and we had been just issued recently a hard-pressed suitcase that the Red Cross provided that had just luxuries of life. They were a comb, a brush, soap, and washcloth, and sweaters, and cigarettes, and I don't know, they were just, I call them just luxuries of life that we'd been denied for the last several days, toothbrush, and all that sort of thing. And so what it appeared to me that they were trying to jostle those out of our hands. I bet there were luxuries of life that perhaps German citizens didn't have, but I don't know that. I'm just assuming that they wanted to deprive us. And so next I knew, out of breath, beside me was a fellow that I'd known in radio school, so I knew him, and I took his suitcase and
Helped them along.
hoping that I would be able to carry the both of them, and which I was able to do finally. But after that arrival at Stalag Luft 4, on a flatbed wagon, there were 35 or more that had fallen or been jabbed or bitten by the dogs to an extent that they had to climb on that wagon and be brought up that way. But I did see a couple of fellows with blood, this sort of clotted blood on their trousers all the way up to their thighs, and that had been pricked through with a bayonet, and that looked pretty gruesome. But some, we don't know whether all of them made it or not. But so then we were put into the Stalag Luft 4 was a barbed wire enclosed camp with division of 4 different compounds, and A, B, C, and D, and I was in C compound. And at the time they hadn't finished the barracks, and so there were tents, and we moved into tents, and at first, and one of the things that I remember is that I don't know, when the guards were going through with the dogs, I don't know, but can you imagine a German Shepherd jumping onto a canvas tent and sliding and hearing the bark? But I just think that's another one of those intimidation things, but that was just once that I knew, and whether they threw something onto the tent and had the dog go after it or not, but it was just, that's one example of what it just seemed like intimidation all the time. And then we were lined up night and morning to be counted, and and sometimes those ordeals were long. And in the summer, that was when I went there in late August, and and some of the days were hot, and we'd stand there in the sun, and it just seemed like forever. And some of the guys would pass out, having stood a long time, but I don't know. In the wintertime, December, January, it was so cold that it seemed like we'd freeze before that would be over. But we'd have someone bring a bucket of food, and I call it a bucket. It was a galvanized pail, and the hot potatoes or soup, could be cabbage soup, but once in a while we'd get a barley cereal that was just, I don't know, I just think back and think that was elegant, but most of the stuff we was okay. If it was cabbage soup, if you found a piece of cabbage, you were lucky, but it was hot, and it was something warm, and we'd get a piece of bread, of that dark German bread, which we learned to eat, and I've heard a lot of description about what that was made of, but obviously it was not Wonder Bread that we remember back home, and so our camp life, we had we were locked into the well, they soon had the barracks completed, and so the tents were, before the summer was out, we moved into barracks, and they'd locked us into the barracks, and there was a communal restroom at the end, but it was just a one or two holder, as I remember. It was a pretty limited bathroom, and so the whole gang couldn't go there at once, but it was a emergency thing when the place was locked up. And we had our pitcher of water, so we could brush our teeth and have some little routine of order while we were in prison camp. But on February 6th of 1945 is when we could begin. The days before, we could hear the boom of artillery and to the east, and we were told, well, that's Uncle Joe. That was Joe Stalin, and the Russians were coming close. And so on February 6th, without much notice, Stalingrad 4 was being evacuated, and we were put out onto the road and forced to walk in those winter days. And I remember one of the times, and I'm not sure if the first night or the very soon right after, there was no place, no shelter, no barn. Sometimes they'd herd us into a barn, and we were very lucky when that happened. And it wasn't. It was just an enclosure out of the severe elements, and so that was learned that it was luxury compared to sleeping out on the ground with our bedroll. And sometimes a couple guys would join together and use the same. Each one then would have a double layer over them instead of a single, and that's how many times we did get by, but it was cold, and I remember how being so stiff in the morning that I thought, oh, I'll never be able to run and walk evenly again, and I was so stiff, and it's about the way I feel sometimes now to get in gear and walk, but in those days when we were young, it was just devastating. But we kept on walking, and no destination. It was just a matter of keeping us out of the hands of the Germans and out of the hands of the Russians, so that we wouldn't be volunteers against the Germans. I think that's basically the reason that we were kept on the road. And but we'd go past these mounds of kohlrabies, and sometimes we could have some of those raw things to eat, and other times they were forbidden, and or we'd hear the guards say verboten. So but this went on until, you know, my feet were in terrible shape. We didn't have our clothes off because we just had to keep them on for comfort, and we didn't have, and so then we began to get lice, and I remember when the days were warm and we were laying over, not marching that day, by pulling off your long johns and pulling them inside out, you could pick off those lice, and you put them back on, and it was like a new set of clothes. We didn't have that irritation of the lice coming up the back of your neck to your hair, and so, but we did have a lot of sickness and dysentery, and I know that we were marched through towns, and some guys they just had to pull their pants off and go rather than to, and the villagers, all I can think of, it's nothing more than like a herd of cattle going through a village, and if someone had to relieve himself, it was done right in public as we walked along, and I don't know what we must have looked like, but what I remember too, come to think of it, is that some of these farm workers, and I think they perhaps were Polish arbeiters, working to keep farms going, and they were sympathetic, and sometimes they'd come out with a pail of water and stand by the road, and the guards would beat them back. And I realized it wasn't that, I realized that it was to try to keep control of us, because we were thirsty. We were thirsty, seemed like all the time we were walking, and occasionally though we'd have something like that, we could stop and get water, or but it was pretty disorganized, and I think, and I'm sure that to beat those good intentioned workers that were offering us drinks, I can think back now, and I shouldn't be thinking of the what on the other side, the devil's advocate, but they'd lose control of this whole bunch of hungry, thirsty men, and so they had to do that. But I'll never forget the compassion that was offered to us by those Polish workers that showed us, that showed compassion and tried to give us a drink. But okay, so one of the days toward the end and toward April, we began to realize that the guards were not the mean guys that they had been earlier. I guess we could all see the handwriting on the wall, and so they were better. They became, I think, I associate that with being our guides rather than our guards, because sometimes going through the villages that had been bombed, they hustled us right through because there was some hostile feeling against airmen that, and there we were with some of us had the Air Force jackets on, and I don't know, I didn't have mine. I don't know where my nice flight jacket did go to, but they had to keep us moving through fast, or the hostile crowd would turn their anger on us. And but at a point I said, okay, you know, we never knew what was happening to what was in the back. And sometimes it was rumored that, oh, he couldn't keep up, and we heard a shot back there, and so there was just a feeling that if you couldn't keep up, you might not be, you'd just be left. And so you just keep on day after day, and it was laboring, and just to walk was a big effort. And so on the 24th of April, I decided that I was going to get to the back of the line. My feet were very well infected and blistered, and so I was with another fellow who had the same feeling, I guess, and we fell back with what we call the sick straggler group, and the body of the march went on, and everything was quiet. No guards, no soldiers, and the whole town was sort of just a lazy town with no action in it whatsoever. It was just a quiet time to be flopped down on the ground and not walking. And next we knew, there were 2 Russian soldiers came in to the town on horseback, and we went up to them and said we were American, and I remember the guy, he said, "Amerikansky," and enthusiastically saying that, and it was just, that looked like freedom compared to what we hadn't had anyone look at us with enthusiasm or any kind of a morale booster before, but certainly that was just wonderful. And so they were not there to do anything about prisoners of war. They were just, I can think of them as conquering heroes on horseback, riding ahead, and so we were allowed to walk around. And so the next morning, I went to a barn that was there, and there were milk women with maids. I mean, I call them milkmaids because they had their head wrapped up with bandana or a little cap, I'm not sure, something like that. And so we got warm milk which was wonderful. And so for quite a few days, we lived off the fat of the land. I had raised chickens when I was home, and I knew what was in the chicken house. There were eggs and in fact, chickens. And so I butchered chickens, and there was and some of these homes were vacant. We went into a home that was right next to the farm, and there was no one in there, but there was a stove, and so that's where three of us went into and had the conveniences of a stove, and so we cooked these chickens, and what a feast that was, and potatoes. And it was, but for a couple of weeks, I was living like that, off the fat of the land, and in with Russian soldiers coming and going, and they didn't seem to care. I had a bicycle that, I don't know, I didn't take it away from anyone, but later on, a Russian soldier came up and took a bike like, that's my bike, not your bike, and so that was the end of my bike riding. But we waited in the little town of Torgau, and we were able to go into a barracks where I found very interesting stuff. One of the things that I found was a warning note that had been dropped by our planes that that said it said the governments of the USSR, USA, and Great Britain, to all German commanders, guard units, and Gestapo officers, in the name of the United Nations, which are at war with Germany, the governments of the USSR, USA, and Great Britain address hereby a solemn warning to all commanders and guard units who are in charge of Allied prisoners in Germany and areas occupied by Germany. Also to the Gestapo officers and any other person in whatever position and rank who are in charge of Allied POWs in battle areas or further back. The three governments declare that all these persons are personally responsible for the safety and the well-being of all Allied POWs who are in their power to the same extent as the German High Command and the German military authorities. Any person who mistreats any Allied POW or abets such treatment, be it in the battle area, in transit, in camps, hospitals, prisons, or anywhere else, will be persecuted and punished without leniency. The three governments draw strict attention to it that this responsibility is absolute and applies in all circumstances. Nobody can escape it by trying to push responsibility on others. And it was signed by Marshal of the Soviet Union J. Stalin, President of the United States Harry Truman, Prime Minister of Great Britain W. Churchill. And that was dated April 23, 1945. So it was and it was in German. This is a translation, and but also what I found were some little snapshots that I had enlarged, but these were I don't know if you want to zero in on these or...
Stick on.
But this is life in Germany at the time, and I marvel at the fact that I have these because we saw so much of this.
The soldiers just walking on the road and
the
stuff?
The soldiers on the road, and this is the way the German army was operating at that time, with horse and wagon. And these are fellows in a bicycle repair shop. But yes, we saw all we wanted to of these uniforms, and we didn't see the American flag until we got back to, let's see, the last day when I was waiting for a bridge to be repaired at Torgau. And Torgau was where the three different armies came together. I marvel at that because I thought, wow, that's where I was passed through the day before I was liberated. And I went through across the Elbe River on that temporary bridge, and the next day was an American Jeep, and these guys, and I couldn't believe it, but we climbed on board, and they had pictures of Buchenwald and the other death camps, and some of those pictures were just, well, we've seen them now since, but we couldn't believe it. And it was there that one of them offered me a cigarette, and I hadn't had a cigarette and for a long time, and as I inhaled that, I just went completely out of it. It was too much to inhale a cigarette at that time. My weight had gone from a normal 155 down to 118, and so I was better off than I've seen pictures of others that are worse off than I was, but then we were deloused and defumigated and given clean clothes, showered, and began to feel like life was going to be okay again. And then I had some testing done, and I found that I had yellow jaundice, and so I was in the hospital for, I don't know, more than a 2-week stay over there. And then the next move was going through Camp Lucky Strike and at Le Havre, and getting onto a Liberty ship and coming back across the ocean. And but you can't imagine the feeling of seeing the Statue of Liberty. It was, I can believe that the people that came from other lands and saw that Statue of Liberty with the American flag, and we don't really stop to think of what we have in that American flag flying over us. But freedom, we realize, is not free. Not all of us that started out on that plane of Destiny's Child from Bassingbourn, England, on July 20th, 1944. We didn't all see that benefit of the Statue of Liberty that means so much to us who live under the USA flag. But that brought me back into the States. One of the things that I think that meant quite a bit. I think it was Fort Dix that we came through, and there were German prisoners of war there that were putting the food on our platters, and I thought, wow, they could take a taste anytime they wanted to of all that food, and what a difference that was from what we went through when we were in Germany. So, but then I was on a leave of 60-day leave at home, and came home on July 8th of 1945, and met the family and my sweetheart, and we pulled a fast one on Joyce's mother by saying that on August 8th we were going to get married, and since we raised 4 daughters, we realized that a month's notice for a wedding, that was a bad thing to pull on a mother who was preparing a wedding for her daughter, and but it was all taken in stride, and so after that I went into took advantage of the GI Bill of Rights and went to Fanny Farmer's School in Cookery in Boston, Massachusetts, and learned to be a chef. And my father-in-law, who owned this Skyline Tea Room, and made a deal with him to operate that, and he'd supply the building, the equipment, and I'd supply the labor, and that was the agreement that we started out with in 1946, and for 48 years Joyce and I ran the Skyline restaurant, and and we raised our 4 girls, and we now have, of course, I've lost my wife in 2005, and here we're going on 3 years without her, and but she and I ran that Skyline restaurant for 48 years, and we met a lot of people, and the people we made friends in all the communities around here, and even to this day we have reunions of employees that had worked for us, and that's a pretty special and unique thing these days, because we just had some wonderful workers, some loyal and dedicated workers, and they think so highly of us even to this day, and it's been a great thing to have life's work that was so satisfying and beneficial to our whole family. Everyone worked there, and it's been a great livelihood. And as I've thought back and thought, well, how could I go through the flying, the daily routine of flying, the anxiety that was created, and then to survive the riddling that our plane received. And I see, and as I look back, that what would bring me through that prisoner of war experience, but a strong faith in God, and I realize I've been blessed in so many ways. One of the things that I like to, one of the things in the prison camp, we had in 1944, they had an opportunity to have some sporting equipment and some reading material brought into the camp. And so at that time, I, with some other eager guys, read the Holy Bible, and I discovered the 91st Psalm. And that 91st Psalm, there's so many things in it that perhaps I should end up with that 91st Psalm. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He will cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor the destruction that wasteth at noonday. For 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold and see the reward of the wicked, because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. He shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. He shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon thou shalt trample under feet. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He will call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will honor him and deliver him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. That's the 91st Psalm. And I discovered that and I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is meant for a prisoner of war.
Right.